International. And we now talk to Mr. Willem Kitshoff. He's the CEO of the D6 Communicator. I'm sure many moms out there know exactly what I'm talking about. If you have kids at school, it's an application that's used for schools to communicate with their teachers. So parents can communicate with their teachers as well as students using the D6 Communicator on their smartphones. And we're talking about whether schools are prone to a possible data breach. Mr. Willem Kitshoff, welcome to Radio Islam International. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Anissa.
Well, we've seen that schools across the world have very valuable information. And with the recent cyber attacks that we have had in other institutions, how safe are schools in terms of data breaches? And we are going to also look at what can be done to ensure that these personal details aren't shared to the highest bidder or even to the low-life scum that may be trying to get hold of them. So can you tell us a little bit about how schools are actually trying to protect this information that they have?
Anissa, an important factor to consider is that it does not only relate to digital information, it relates to any information that's held by the school. Our understanding is that, in our experience, schools have a lot of sensitive information. They hold all the information of parents and learners, and parents are not always they don't always realize what information they submit to their school. Now, in terms of schools' safety of data storage, especially from a digital perspective, it does vary significantly from school to school. Some schools have adopted well-established data security protocols or implement well-established data security protocols, and they also use well-developed digital platforms for management or learner management. But other schools are still stuck in the 60s, and they still manage their data, both physical and digital, not in a very safe way. The whole implementation of POPI, which has been promulgated now in July, has finally placed a line in the sand in which all organizations have to comply, which does put the burden, unfortunately, on schools and school management to ensure that the data that they hold is kept safe and used in an appropriate manner.
So what exactly is POPI, and why do schools need to be compliant?
So POPI is the Protection of Personal Information Act. That's actually POPIA, which has been promulgated from July this year, which stipulates in a nutshell how data should be stored and used, and what organizations can do with the personal information that they keep of their stakeholders. Now, those stakeholders could be anything. In the school realm, it's the parents and learners and teachers and staff members. And POPI is there to regulate that environment. Interesting, a lot of the schools, or in the European environment, they've implemented GDPR, which is General Data Protection Regulation. And if a school in South Africa has any European data subjects, so let's assume one parent resides in Europe, then that school's environment has to also comply with GDPR. And that's already been in place for the last three or 4 years almost. So it's a major responsibility for schools to ensure, and it relates to all organizations. It's not only schools.
Okay, so in terms of the data that schools hold, what sort of questions then should parents be, asking their schools with regards to this? And, parents sometimes, like you said, are not even aware of the fact that schools will be holding this kind of data. I mean, schools have your ID numbers, copies of your IDs, your bank details, your addresses, sometimes even a parent's schedule, when children are being picked up and that kind of thing. This is sensitive information that could put children and their parents at risk.
Yeah. Well, it's not necessarily something to be scared about or too concerned about. The most important thing is to ensure that the governing body of the schools or the school's management team is aware of their responsibility in terms of what they need to implement. They have a 12-month window period to implement the required regulations and processes internally. So parents should at least start asking the schools whether they do have a POPI implementation process planned or in progress to ensure that they do strive to become compliant. And then second to that, they just need to be aware of the information that they submit to schools. Schools do not ask for information just for the sake